Welcome to the last part of Module 1. So here we will expand a little bit more on what we've already alluded to. Earlier we talked about why research is interesting and important. And we sort of played around with some questions that we might ask ourselves in our daily lives that will require research to find a good answer. But then we come to how to ask a good research question because it actually might be a little bit harder than you might imagine. So let's take a look. First things first, is it interesting? Is the question even worth asking? And that has a couple of components to it. First of all, is it scientifically relevant? Meaning, does it help to resolve contradictory research findings or competing theories? So for example, when we were talking earlier about whether the low carb diet or the low sugar diet or some other sort of diet is best for health and best for weight loss, well, it seems like there's a lot of competing theories out there, a lot of research that contradicts each other, a lot of popular ideas, a lot of media campaigns that purport different things about their special diets. So asking a research question like, which type of diet is best for weight loss and maintaining, say, cardiovascular health is a very scientifically relevant question because it will help to resolve contradictory research and competing theories. Second, but not necessarily any less important, is it socially important or impactful? So will answering this question make a meaningful difference in the world? So if we ask something like, is it possible to train pigeons to deliver letters for the post office? Well, okay, that could be really interesting. It'd be a pretty fun headline to type up for a newspaper, but would it really make a meaningful difference for our society now that we have lots of different transportation modes and delivery modes for mail? Is it really worth asking the question of whether pigeons are, good at delivering mail? So again, we come back to our potential question of, what type of diet is really good for health, and that is socially important because we know that obesity is bad for our health, and it's bad for our economy and bad for the social well-being of people in our communities. So finding out the best and most healthy way of losing weight and maintaining cardiovascular health would make a very meaningful impact upon our society. Another important part of choosing a good research question is asking, is it feasible? So that means, is it doable at all? Can you attempt to answer this question within a budget and a relevant time frame? So we may ask a research question like, is there extraterrestrial life besides the life on planet Earth? That is a really, really interesting question. And, based on our previous criteria, sure, it's very scientifically relevant and possibly socially relevant too. But can we really, as social and health services students at Roger Williams University, can we really answer that question? And is it within our budget, within our time frame? And probably not. And also, will relevant institutions and people support our investigation? So this is talking more about funding and about ethical regulations. So if we want to find out whether people engaging in paleo diets will have a really good weight loss outcome and have a good health outcome, sure, maybe the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, will be really interested in that question and would want to support our investigation by giving us funding and other resources for us to take on this research project. But if we want to ask whether aliens exist and whether they come to our planet to make us fat, I don't know. Maybe that's interesting, but I don't necessarily see that the National Institutes of Health or any other funding agencies would be willing to put up money for that kind of research question. If we all win the lottery and are curious about that still, then sure, we can give it a shot. And like I mentioned before, we also have to consider ethical barriers. So throughout the semester, we will be touching upon this topic about how to balance the relevance of the relevance of a research project with the amount that it will impose upon participants, with the sort of risks that it will be taking or asking participants to take, and other sorts of ethical limitations. So let's look at an example. We have a question: does arresting accused spouse abusers on the spot, as opposed to enforcing some sort of separation and then not arresting them, prevent repeat incidents of spousal abuse? And this is an actual research question that was asked by Sherman and Burke in 1984. So let's take a look. Is it interesting? Does it have scientific value? Sure, at the time, if we had conducted a literature review to look at competing theories, we would have seen that different social scientists had different ideas about whether arresting spousal abusers on the spot versus giving them a second chance or a third chance might actually lead to better outcomes. And so each of those competing camps thought that their way would lead to actually less spousal abuse in the future. So there was a contradiction in theories and contradiction in practice. And so asking this type of research question and doing this type of research project would certainly help to resolve scientific theoretical contradictions. Does it have social relevance? Of course. Asking a question that will lead to an investigation about spousal abusers and about how to reduce this type of crime can be very impactful upon people in our community. Is it feasible? So this is a little bit harder to judge just by reading this research question. But at the time, these researchers had support from their local police departments, as well as other funding agencies who were interested in this type of work. And so they had a team of social scientists that were dedicated to this, and they had resources and funding and the time to do this. And the scope of their research question was able to be asked within a reasonable time frame. They were able to gather data from the archives of the police departments, and they were able to conduct their research relatively quickly. And ethical issues, we will talk more about that in future modules, but for now, suffice it to say that the benefits and the advantages of doing this research and the value of the answers that this research provided outweighed the potential ethical problems that this research introduced. All right, so let's take a look at some other potential research questions and go through them together to see if they would be a good research question, a good example of what you can do for your research project. Could pigeons be trained to deliver letters for the USPS? We already talked about this. Probably not very scientifically interesting. Well, maybe. I'm not sure how you feel about pigeons. Maybe you are very curious about that, but not very socially relevant. Is there extraterrestrial intelligence in the universe? Extremely scientifically interesting, in my opinion, but maybe not so feasible. Can the Zika virus be sexually transmitted? Now, this sounds very scientifically interesting because we don't really have, we have some answers about it, but we don't know everything about this topic yet. Is it socially relevant? Definitely. There is now an epidemic with the Zika virus going around, and we need to be as prepared and as knowledgeable about this virus as possible. So this is the perfect time to be asking questions about the Zika virus and its modes of transmission. Now, let's see if it's feasible. It's hard to say right now without knowing the funding application process, but looking at the archives of data that we have about the Zika virus and tracing the spread of the Zika virus, there is actually public domain information or public domain data on that scientists can look at and other resources that scientists can access in a fairly timely manner to look at this research question. So let's just say for now that yes, it is feasible, and scientists, in fact, are looking at this very question. Does baptism increase likelihood of a person's soul entering heaven? Now, this is very scientifically interesting, perhaps, and socially relevant, and maybe very personally relevant to a lot of people. But is it feasible? This is the type of feasibility we haven't talked about yet. So we can talk about funding feasibility, time frame feasibility, human resources feasibility, but we also need to talk about the feasibility of whether data can be collected for a research question. So since we can't, with the technology that we currently have available, reach into the afterlife and look at the incidence and prevalence of souls entering heaven, it would be very, very difficult to answer this research question. So we're going to say that that is probably not feasible. Okay, now armed with the knowledge and skills of how to choose a good research question, let's assign your very first homework assignment. And this is the beginning of how, this is the very first step to beginning your final research project. So the purpose of this homework assignment is to help you evaluate research questions and begin brainstorming for your final project. The task comes in two parts. Part 1 is to brainstorm at least 5 research questions that address a significant health or social issue in your community. This is the part that is relevant to Module 1. Task Part 2 is to choose one of the questions, or at least one of the questions from your list, one that is maybe most interesting to you or most appropriate for this final project, and write a paragraph or two explaining its scientific and or social relevance. So basically answering the questions of, why is this a good research question to ask? Why would anyone care? And so this assignment 1 will be due on May 29th at noon. Email to me in a email attachment or in the body of an email. And I would highly recommend that you begin part 1 for this week during this module and finish up when you are going through module 2. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or to ask a question in the virtual cafe in Bridges. Best of luck!